In my last video, we talked about how parasites can affect your mood, your emotions, your thinking, your memory, all those different things with the neurotoxins that they produce. So you have that way that they can affect your nervous system, your cognitive abilities, and your emotions, right? But they can actually also get into your nervous system. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And of course, this is very important for people with long COVID, with ME/CFS, with, really any chronic illness, especially if you're dealing with these nervous system issues, with dysautonomia, with neurological issues. And of course, these are some similar things that can be caused by the neurotoxins. These are also things like cognitive impairment. So, brain fog, anyone, memory issues, mood issues like depression or anxiety, or getting irritated easily, or anger. I know that, getting super irritated was one of the things that I dealt with when I was so sick. And in addition to all the other things that I just listed, but this also includes things like spasms, balance, numbness, maybe neuropathy, and just a host of other symptoms that can be related to parasites being actually in the central nervous system. Please note that I am not a doctor. This is not medical advice. This is all my opinion and based on my own research, which you can, of course, do your own, and also based on my experience with my clients and students, and with the illnesses that I've recovered from myself. So if we've not met, hello, I'm Lorrie, and I've been working with people for over 20 years now about how to heal from ME/CFS and now from long COVID. And I have my own experience with healing from both of those, and now from lifelong fibromyalgia as well. So I now actually teach people how to fully treat the underlying cause of long COVID, of ME, myalgic encephalomyelitis, of chronic fatigue syndrome, of fibromyalgia, and of other chronic illnesses. And we do this in my Relief and Transformation, Recovering from Long COVID and ME/CFS course. And this is an online course. You can learn more about that course if you want to, or about my story and about how to work with me in the About section of my channel. Or, I have lots of free things that we offer, free workshops and things like that, and all these videos. But for today, for right now, let's get to this. And I know that it's a kind of a scary thing, right? To think about parasites in our spine, in our spinal fluid, in our brains, and things like that. Because when we usually think about parasites, we usually think about our gut, right? We think about our intestines. And as we talked about in the last video, those can certainly affect our nervous system as well because of those neurotoxins that they create. But then you've also got these parasites that actually invade the nervous system and live there, actually causing damage, and which can cause those symptoms in addition to the neurotoxins. Now, there are several different types of parasites that can infect the central nervous system and have been found there before. And this includes fungus, this includes Borrelia, which is what causes Lyme disease, different types of protozoa, those are the one-celled organisms, and also worms, which are also known as helminths, and those are just a few. And, the worms, the helminths, they can be small to the point where they can't be seen by the human eye. It just means that they're multi-celled organisms, right? And we've been talking lately about what a parasite is, but let's just revisit it. And it's pretty simple. It's any organism that's living inside of you and off of you. In other words, it's taking your nutrients, it's sucking the life from you, really, and at the same time causing you harm. So not only is it taking your nutrients, but it's also releasing these toxins that we've been talking about. And so many more people have parasites today than is recognized or realized. And the symptoms are so widely varied from person to person that it's very difficult to diagnose. And on top of that, the testing is just really not great. There are many, many more false negatives than there are true, positives that come out of that. So let's talk about the central nervous system, these infections, right? So an example of a central nervous system infection with parasites would be with protozoa. So for example, single-celled organisms like toxoplasmosis. And that's something that you could pick up, for example, while changing kitty litter. So you want to be very careful with that, wearing your mask and your gloves and things like that. And then you do have worms. And these are things that we usually think of when we hear the term parasites, right? But there are tons of different kinds of worms as well. You have your roundworms, your flatworms, your tapeworms, and tapeworms are the ones that we're probably the most familiar with because they can get to be really, really super long. Flukes, things like liver flukes, but flukes can live anywhere in the body as well, and others. Now, the larger worms, like the tapeworms, don't usually live in the central nervous system. But there was actually a study done recently on a deceased, actually MS patient, and there was a very large tapeworm found in the in the spinal fluid. And sometimes, so more often though, tapeworm larvae are found in the central nervous system. And it's difficult to study, first of all, because it's just not a place that many scientists think of to look for parasites. And it's just not the causal reason that most scientists are looking for as far as these chronic illnesses. But there have been some studies found that show that flukes and filarial worms can get into the central nervous system as well. So because of what I was talking about before, because so little research has been done in the area of ME/CFS and long COVID and fibromyalgia and parasites, I find it helpful to look at some other studies done in the areas of other, mystery chronic illnesses like MS. And there's actually a study done by Dr. Alan McDonald where he found filarial worms in the central nervous system of people that had multiple sclerosis, and that these worms were actually in their brains post-mortem. He also found that when filarial worms are found in the central nervous system of domestic animals, that they have symptoms of MS. So that's really interesting to me because, and probably to you as well, because there is some overlap there between MS and ME/CFS and long COVID. And in fact, a lot of people who eventually get the diagnosis of ME/CFS or long COVID maybe previously got the diagnosis of MS and vice versa. So the thing is that, again, these different parasites create different toxins, and the different toxins affect different people in different ways. So we have so many different variables going on here. Another variable that comes in with what we're talking about right now with the central nervous system and parasites in the central nervous system is that depending on the location of where the parasite is in the brain or in the spinal cord, that also causes specific symptoms. Right? So different symptoms depending on where and which type of parasite it is, and then also how the specific person's body responds to that parasite and to the toxins that it creates. So talking about location of the parasite, perhaps it affects those particular nerves wherever it is, let's say within the spinal cord, right? Maybe it affects those particular nerves. And maybe those particular nerves end up causing the pain in certain areas in the body or the neuropathy, or maybe if it's closer up to in a specific part of the brain, then that might end up causing brain fog or memory issues or POTS or fever, or for some people who have parasitic infections in the central nervous system, seizures is actually something that is a symptom that they end up experiencing. So, right, So these parasites, let's talk a little bit more about why the parasites cause symptoms. And that's for a few different reasons. So the first is that they can actually cause structural damage, right? So if they're living in the spine, or if they're living in the brain, or if they're affecting nerves, right, directly by their location, then that's the first way. The second way is what I've mentioned several times already, and that's that they release these toxins, right, that affect the body in different ways. And then the third is that they cause inflammation in the body, because the body's immune system is doing what it should be doing, which is trying to get rid of them. And so it does cause that inflammation to try to get rid of them, but there are too many to get rid of, or it's not effective in getting rid of them. And so it's just causing this continuous inflammation, which that causes swelling, which can cause problems in the central nervous system again, right? So that's actually really 4 different ways. So if you want to look into more detail about more of the specifics of what I'm talking about, I'm actually writing a blog about this, and you'll find a link to a couple of articles there, one of which is the 2016 study that kind of inspired this particular talk about the central nervous system and parasites, and a couple of other good articles too. And then you can also look up the work of Dr. Alan McDonald. And just remember too that the article that I have the link to in the blog only talks about a few of the possible infections of the central nervous system. And another important thing to remember about these infestations in the central nervous system is that it happens over time, meaning that the infection usually starts from something that we've ingested, or it's come in through our skin. And so originally it lives either in the intestines or in the skin, wherever it came in through. And over time, though, once the infection gets fed, or if we're in stressful situations, or, as it proliferates, and as it's compromised our immune system, and we end up having leaky gut and other compromised organs, really, even leaky brain blood barrier, right? Then the parasites, they're able to migrate to different parts of our body from our intestines. So that's where we end up getting, these infections that live in our joints and our muscles and our organs, like liver and central nervous system. And I know that all of this is really gross and kind of scary too, right? Oh my gosh, do I have worms in my brain? But I also want you to know, I hope that you can embrace that it's actually good news to know that this is a possibility, right? Because this is not a place that most doctors look. And the other good news is that if you do suspect that you have parasitic infections, period, whether it's central nervous system or not, if you have a chronic illness or chronic symptoms, then you probably do, is what we're finding, then there are things that you can do to treat them. And I'm going to be talking about how to treat parasites, or how we treat parasites in the Relief and Transformation course in another video, which is also how I treated it for myself, for my own lifelong fibromyalgia, which I'm now free of for the first time in my whole life. And I'm like 48 years old or something. So it's amazing to be living in this kind of new body, right? And, I wish that it were a really super simple, straightforward process. And I could say, hey, you take this medication and that'll do it for you. Or you take these herbal supplements and that'll do it for you. But what we find is that it's different for different people. There needs to be a different approach. There's a kind of a basic process, and that's what we'll be going through. I'm like tripping over my words today for some reason, but different people are dealing with different parasites, and usually a combination of many different types of parasites, including fungus, including, candida, things like that. And again, it would be great if we could just say, okay, long COVID is caused by this parasite, so let's just treat for that. And then there's nothing else to treat, but that's not the case. And again, I'm not a doctor. And I also want to say that I am not a big medication person at all. But we do find that medications have to be used, and oftentimes several of them at once. And actually, these medications like albendazole, praziquantel, pyrantel pamoate, and mebendazole work really well and are sometimes prescribed for students in the course, depending on what the student is dealing with. And there are other medications as well. So there's that treatment portion of it. But in addition to that, you also need to go through a prep phase, which is very important because you don't want to start treating if the detox pathways aren't open for the body. Because when you do start treating, it means a lot of die off, which is when the parasites are dying, right? Which is a good thing. But it also releases a lot of toxins into the body. And this is a place where a lot of people go wrong. I know this is actually where I went wrong when I was trying to treat for parasites many, many years ago when I first had severe ME/CFS. But I would just end up making myself so ill because I hadn't done the prep phase and because I wasn't approaching it in the way that I now know how to approach it. So, but what's interesting too is that a lot of relief and transformation students end up starting to pass worms just in the prep phase, even before they start treating. And when that happens, we have a party because it's such good news and because it's kind of a relief for them to know that, yes, that is obviously causing problems in my body, right? There's a reason for all this that I've been experiencing. So even though there's not a one pill fits all in this video, because that just doesn't exist, my hope is that in gaining more understanding and knowledge, that you will feel empowered and understand a bit more about what might be contributing to your illness. And again, we're going to go into more detail about the way that we treat in the relief and transformation course for these underlying root cause parasitic hidden infections. So I will see you there next time.